Are we living in the last days? There was a time when a last days message might have seemed fanatical, but with prominent economists, scientists, politicians, and commentators now issuing grave warnings about the present course of world events, those days are clearly over.
The Philadelphia Church of God presents the Trumpet Daily.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Trumpet Daily. With people in every century absolutely sure that they were living in the time of the end, the time shortly before the return of Jesus Christ to this earth, how can we be sure that we are living in the last days? Can we even know? To begin with, let us first consider the world we live in. Even the casual observer, one would think, can see that something is terribly wrong with this world. Just look at some of the headlines from over the past few years. At the very end of 2004, a little over 7 years ago, a devastating earthquake rocked the Indian Ocean, which triggered a massive tsunami that wiped out 230,000 lives in Indonesia. Nearly 250,000 people just swept out to sea. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina plowed into the Gulf Coast, killing more than 1,800 people. It was the deadliest hurricane to strike America in more than 75 years. We also saw a Bavarian cardinal become the Vatican's new pope in 2005. The Trumpet, by the way, correctly predicted this change in leadership before it happened. In 2006, Israel was at war with Hezbollah in Lebanon. America's government that same year took a radical swing to the left. In 2007, Israel bombed Syria's nuclear facility. Some analysts even said this nearly started World War III. In Gaza, Hamas grabbed hold of power by forcibly imposing its will on Fatah. In 2008, Russia invaded Georgia, Iran conquered Lebanon, Germany conquered Kosovo, and the United States ran Musharraf out of office in Pakistan. At the time, the Trumpet compared that to America's abandonment of the Shah of Iran back in the late 1970s. We pushed an ally into the hands of radical Islam, we wrote. Now look at the relationship between the United States and Pakistan today. Of course, the biggest news from 2008 was that the U.S. economy came within a few minutes of total financial meltdown. At the time, the New York Post said that the market was just 500 trades away from Armageddon. According to the New York Times, the American financial system was sliding from grim toward potentially apocalyptic. We were right on the brink, and right now, we're trying to keep ourselves afloat by spending trillions of dollars that we either have to borrow or print. Let me ask you something. How much longer do you think we can survive on that kind of economic model? How much longer do you think it will be before the once mighty dollar collapses? And if that happens, how will that impact America's standing in the world? Will the world become safer and more stable when nations abandon the dollar as the reserve currency? Or will it become more dangerous, more unstable? In 2009, to continue, as the new administration in Washington continued pushing allies into the hands of enemies, the Lisbon Treaty became Europe's new constitution. That same year, Europe was rocked by an economic crisis of its own that opened the way for Germany to play the dominant role of savior. In fact, the global financial crisis is not only furnishing Germany with the opportunity to dominate Europe, it's expanding its reach beyond Europe's borders. This is of great prophetic significance, as many of our Trumpet readers know. Well, what about last year? In 2010, for all intents and purposes, Iraq fell to Iran, something we've been predicting for many years. The US dollar came under assault. America's ties with Israel unraveled, and Britain surrendered its military sovereignty. And look at what's happened just this year in the Middle East and North Africa. The collapse of Tunisia's government in mid-January triggered a firestorm of protest and violence that is still burning across the region. In Egypt, the United States forced out Hosni Mubarak and handed the nation over to the Muslim Brotherhood, a radical transformation that the Trumpet has predicted for nearly 20 years. Of course, it's Iran, the #1 state sponsor of terrorism, that stands to benefit most from this rampant spread of radical Islam. Just last week, Iran's clients in Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and the West Bank converged on Israel's borders to set off violent clashes with Israeli forces. It was only a matter of time before these violent upheavals throughout the Middle East would begin to have an impact on Israel. As one commentator noted in the National Review, an Arab war against Israel is more likely now than at any time in the last 25 years. Now, what about the so-called natural disasters? Last year, more human beings died in natural disasters than any other year on record. The Associated Press said 2010 was the year the Earth struck back. And so far this year, the disasters aren't exactly slowing down. In January, Australia sustained its worst flooding in history, a biblical disaster according to the leading daily in Brisbane. In February, a devastating earthquake in New Zealand pretty much wiped out the central district of Christchurch. In March, another earthquake off the coast of Japan touched off one of the deadliest tsunamis in history, causing tens of thousands of deaths. Here in America, during one deadly day in April, a total of 312 tornadoes just shredded the South. It more than doubled the previous record for the most tornadoes to ever strike America in one day. Then, just last week, Mississippi floodwaters surged through central Louisiana, wiping out thousands of acres of farmland and small communities. To protect cities like Baton Rouge and New Orleans, a spillway was opened to divert water from the increasingly strained levees. Government officials were left with the choice of flooding the farms or allowing a flood to hit New Orleans that would have been worse than Katrina. What is happening in this world? Are these normal times in which we are living? Or are we living in the last days, the very last generation before the return of Jesus Christ? Let's begin today by noticing a verse in Luke chapter 21 and verse 28. And while we turn over there, I'd just like to give a plug to the PDF article that we're going to be offering at the end of today's program. This will be another in the line of the Trumpet Daily reprint series titled, Are We Living in the Last Days? It will supplement the theme on today's program. It has 2 articles in it, and you can just jot down the number on your screen right now and make sure that you either call for this article at the end of the program or go to thetrumpetdaily.com right now or right after the program and download your own copy today. All right, Luke chapter 21 and verse 28, it says, And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draws near. Now we've listed through a number of things that are happening in this world. This world is becoming increasingly dangerous, and we certainly don't want to just focus in on one particular trend or one particular event and jump to conclusions based upon that. It's important, of course, to step back and to get the big picture here. But at the same time, whether it's Jesus Christ or the Apostle Paul or whoever in the Bible, there are a number of specifics that they give to us that tell us what is to happen in the latter days and what Christ is talking about in this chapter, Luke 21, and the companion chapter over in Matthew 24. What he's talking about in these chapters, it includes many prophesied events that are now occurring for the very first time, right now, today. That's what makes these events so significant. It's not like you're picking just one event to key on. It's all kinds of events in this world. It's no wonder that so many commentators are concerned about this age that we're living in. No wonder they're concerned about today. Notice 2 Timothy 3. And verse 1. It says, This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. Paul wrote about the last days. He was concerned about events that would happen in the latter days. Jesus said so much about the last days as well. And notice he says that in those days it would be perilous. Another word for that, if you look into the meaning there in the Greek, is dangerous. We're living in dangerous times. We'll go to Matthew 24 in just a little bit, but just to get a little bit ahead of myself, it says over there in Matthew 24 that unless Jesus Christ intervenes in this earth, unless He intervenes in human affairs, all flesh is in danger of being destroyed. Now, we've never even had a time in the history of man when that's been possible, except with the invention of modern warfare weapons. That is now possible. Look at what Mr. Armstrong had to say, switching back to 2 Timothy 3 here, about what Paul describes of these latter days. Mr. Armstrong writes in his booklet, Are We in the Last Days? This is a prophecy, as it plainly states, for the last days. He says, when I was a little boy, 90 years ago, those conditions were not true or escalating as they have been within the last 20 or 30 years. He says the weapons have never existed in all history that could have laid all cities waste until the hydrogen bomb of some 30 years ago. How significant, he says, that this became possible only during the time while this gospel of the kingdom was going from nation to nation into all the world for a witness unto all nations. And again, we'll see a prophecy about that in Matthew 24 in just a second. But just to key in on that point where he says that how different it was for him when he was a young boy. And some of you watching this program, no doubt, can remember a generation or two ago and just how different it was then compared to today. That's not to say there weren't problems 50 or 60 years ago, but look at the weight of these problems as they're coming down on society. And it's all described for us right in the book that God inspired. Verse 2, it says, For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, and unholy. I mean, here Paul is describing human nature in all of its ugly detail, all of its ugliness today, where children are disobedient to parents, where society as a whole is unthankful, where there's no holiness, but rather proud people, boasting of their accomplishments, lovers of selves more than lovers of God or even others, selfish love, selfish lusts. And if ever there's a description that just more aptly fits today, this is certainly it. Verse 3 continues, without natural affection, truce breakers, it says, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good. See, just competing one against the other. You have person against person, group is against group, nation is against nation. The threat of terrorism and the like spreading across this earth. Why so much division? Why so much fighting? Why so much strife and hatred? It's just increasing between nations. It's increasing between husband and wife, between parents and children. It's increasing between groups. God said that it would be that way. Verse 4 continues, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. People who will invest so much time and energy into pleasure seeking and so little time into the Word of God and so little time into the truth of God, but rather just pursuing after the lusts of the flesh